Sarah. Change the subject.
Change the subject.
Change
Well
the
then, you had said you wanted to talk about some domestic
Sure,
policy. So
yeah.
one thing that's been in the news a lot is the subprime mortgage problem, and wondering if there's a plan for it. I had some trouble finding any information, if you've come out with a plan at this point, and also if there's anyone between lenders, borrowers, home buyers, home sellers, everyone, if there's anyone who's not at fault for what's happened, and anyone who in particular is.
Well, I'm not going to assess blame. The oversight from the appropriate committees was not very intense. Number one. Number two, the overall rationale for hedge funds not requiring transparency or accountability in general terms makes sense, which was that you have to have $1 million to get in a hedge fund, so the government has no responsibility to protect your $1 million, unlike your $50 deposit at the local savings and loan, and therefore there's no need for this accountability. But what we didn't know is since there was no transparency, we still don't know how deep this hole is, because as you know better than I, as well as I do, what these guys did, these hedge funds went out and bought all of these portfolios of subprime mortgages. They used them as collateral to go out and borrow a whole heck of a lot more money to do things that were substantial. Now the collateral is worthless, basically, and you're finding not only those who bought into the subprime mortgages and are now going to be bumped out of their homes, but you have a lot of people being affected. And the big problem here is we don't know how deep the hole is, because there's no transparency. And I've called for and been calling for the fact of accountability to hedge funds, that they have to be transparent. We have to have some idea what in fact they own, where their investments are, so we know how deep the problem is. Number two, from the beginning, there's only a couple things the federal government can do. The Secretary of Treasury moved positively, but not nearly enough. It'll only affect about 175,000 of the home buyers out of the 2 million that fall into this category. We should change the bankruptcy code now to allow a bankruptcy judge to be able to renegotiate principal as well as interest in dealing with bankruptcies that people are engaged in, to in other words, refinance within the bankruptcy system these homes so they don't have to leave their homes, number one. Number two, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have to be given a higher ceiling on their ability to be able to go in and get involved in helping shore up through seconds these very people who can afford to stay in their homes if the rate is not raised. And number three, you have to, at this point, broaden what the Secretary of Treasury is doing to require and allow for renegotiation of all of these loans before you foreclose on these loans. Because it's very much in the interest of the United States of America to, in fact, keep these people, 2 million people, from leaving their homes if there's any way they can afford to stay in at the interest rate, the teaser rate they got, and allow them to refinance over a much longer time to stay in their homes. That's all designed to prevent this thing from cratering even more deeply than it is now. But what you have to do from this point on is you have to do away with essentially what amounts to predatory lending practices, not disclosing what the cost of your insurance is going to be and what the cost of the utilities are going to be to these people buying homes, or what in terms of withholding from banks as to what counts as your total mortgage. And so there needs to be a lot more disclosure. In essence, though, that what we should be doing is bailing out these gullible homeowners rather than bailing out the greedy holders of the loans. Instead of bailing out the banks, we should be bailing out the individuals. That will have the effect of preventing this virus from spreading as rapidly and as profoundly as it will, and it will not reward those who are the reason why we got in this position in the first place.
How do you do that,
Yeah.
though?
The way you do it is you do it one at a time. What you do is you say you cannot foreclose unless you, in fact, go back and negotiate. You negotiate that loan. Those who are moving to bankruptcy, you say to the bankruptcy judge, you have the authority. You have the authority to write in, just like they can do in every other aspect of bankruptcy, saying, lender, you are not going to get paid. at 12%. You are not going to be able to foreclose. They're going to keep their home. They're going to pay at the 2% teaser rate, and the principal is going to be reduced as well in bankruptcy here because they cannot afford to pay that to keep them in their home. I mean, it literally is very difficult because most of these are bundled. Most of these mortgages, I know you know, are bundled and then they're sold in big bundles. And so the industry says it's too hard to do them one at a time. The answer is it's hard. It's hard, but it's necessary.
In terms of corrective steps or preventative steps, you left out requiring schools to teach economic education.
Well, that's true. That's true. But this part of you take a look at the paper. If it's not my website, we'll get it to you. That in fact that's one of the responsibilities and the abilities we can provide for and instruct Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to be engaged in, and that is actually letting people know what the totality of their exposure is and why. But ultimately, you know, if you're going to have somebody out there who's going to lend somebody a lot of money without the ability to pay, and it's a relatively uneducated buyer, it's awful hard to figure out how to totally avoid that situation, other than requiring before the signing of these mortgages, these subprimes, requiring full disclosure as to what the total costs are for people, which is not required.